Okay, let's talk social engineering. Social engineering is really referring to the idea that the weakest factor in security is people. People are the weakest link in any organization. And this here's a quote from Kevin Mitnick, who was a famous hacker from the 1990s, early 2000s, who it turned out most of his hacks and most of his exploits of organizations and agencies and things like that all came from social engineering. He was fairly good computer skill wise. He was really good computer skill wise, but most importantly, he had people skills, and he could recognize when there were opportunities to use people and exploit people to get what he wanted to get at inside of an organization. So we're going to go over a couple of kind of simple attacks. We have nowhere near enough time to cover everything that goes into social engineering. I recommend checking out the social engineer framework at social-engineer.org/framework. There's a lot of information there, a lot of things into the psychology of why this works, into the techniques and even tools that are used. And some of the tools are a little out of date because the framework hasn't been updated in a little while, but the information there is still super duper valuable. But we'll talk about some simple attacks. The first one we're going to talk about is shoulder surfing. And shoulder surfing is basically sitting near someone and looking over their shoulder and looking and seeing that they're typing in their password, or looking at the keyboard and seeing the password that they're typing on their keyboard. There's nothing more to it than that. It's just exploiting human vulnerability and exploiting the human factor. Now, it's not so much the human weakness so much as it is the necessity of logging in all the time, but it still falls under social engineering, and it's a tool that social engineers can use, or attackers can use, as they're looking to gather information and infiltrate or attack an organization. Another one is tailgating. This is an image of a man who's opening a door. He's in the process of authenticating himself using a PIN or a card or something along those lines to gain access to a secure area. And another man comes up behind him and says, "Hey, can I just follow you in?" Or doesn't say anything and just follows him in. That's an example of tailgating, and this is where a man gains access to a secure area without authenticating himself. And this is another example of social engineering, especially as people want to be liked. They don't want to be a jerk and say, "No, you can't come in," or inconvenience other people and say, "Oh, you have to pull out your own card." Even though that may be the policy of the organization, people don't want to go through that trouble, so they'll just let someone into that secure area that maybe they shouldn't be in because they haven't seen their authentication. The simplest of all the simple tasks is just to ask for the information that you want. So if you call someone's desk phone and say you're IT and that you need their password to be able to access some resource, or their account's been having trouble, and you say you want to fix it and you need their password to be able to check and see if the fix worked. People fall for this stuff all the time. Now, hopefully you in this class are more sophisticated, more knowledgeable, and you're not going to fall for it, but other people fall for that kind of stuff all the time. And you have to be careful, because sometimes it's not about getting a password or something that's super duper obvious. You know, if someone asks for my password, that is a red flag in my head immediately. But there might be other pieces of information that people are asking about that I may not think are important, but might just be a part of kind of a larger attack that they're participating in, or this may just be a part of the information gathering of the attack that they're preparing for. So saying you forgot your badge and asked to be let into the secure area or into the office, that's an example. Simply just plain old asking for what you want. And hoaxes are another example. This is a much broader example, and usually not a part of a targeted social engineering attack on an organization, but people fall for these things all the time. With iOS 7, I remember there was the rumor that the update from iOS 6 to iOS 7 made your phone waterproof, and then the iOS 7 to iOS 8 upgrade was that your phone could then be charged by the microwave. Neither of those is true. Water would still destroy your iPhone, and the microwave would also destroy your iPhone. So don't do those things. Those were hoaxes. Nothing more to them except that they're mildly funny, except sad for the people who fell for them. If you're a social engineer and you're preparing for maybe a very specific targeted attack on an organization, sometimes one big targeted attack requires a few littler attacks, smaller attacks, to gather information to develop an effective pretext. And what a pretext is essentially creating a believable backstory that you can use to get what you want. So if you've got one big target in an organization, you want to get access to the server room, for example. To get to that point, you have to do some research. You have to gather some information, and you have to build your story that you're going to be able to use to exploit the social components of the vulnerability. So you want to gather information about who is who inside the organization. So who are you going to claim your boss is, or who are you going to claim sent you to do this work? What kind of equipment is used? Who are their suppliers? Who's their shipping company? Because if you could show up in a UPS uniform and FedEx is their shipping company, well, that's not going to get you very far. So doing all of this research and gathering and creating that believable backstory is all a part of preparing essentially for an attack. And there's a whole bunch of information gathering that goes into preparing to conduct your social engineering. One of the major components is OSINT, or open source intelligence. And open source intelligence is exploiting everything that you can learn about an organization without ever contacting them or without ever touching. You're not walking through the building. You might walk around the building, but you're not, jiggling locked doors or stealing security passes or anything at this point. The open source intelligence phase is looking from the outside, what can you gather? So looking at photographs, physical layouts of things, knowing which part of the building you need to go to, taking pictures and doing your own surveillance as you watch the organization. When do people come? When do people leave? Who's coming when? And a lot of it comes through the internet, through publicly available information, whether that's visiting the company website, using Google, and specifically Google hacking, which we'll talk about in just a second, and social networks, pulling information from employees. LinkedIn is a big resource. Facebook's a big resource. Getting all of the information that you can is just kind of building this really broad case and this broad base of information that you can use when you're exploiting people inside of the organization. Google hacking, like I was talking about, is essentially using Google and using the way Google allows you to kind of tweak search results to target specific things. So for example, with the site operator, site : and then a domain name, you can say, I only want to see search results that are at this company's domain name. With the file type, you could say, I only want to see search results that are PDF. So if you combine site and file type PDF, you can find PDFs of information that are publicly indexed on Google. And sometimes that information is stuff that shouldn't be publicly indexed on Google. Somebody made a mistake, pushed the wrong file to the web server, or put the wrong permissions on a file on the web server, and it's publicly accessible instead of limited to internal use. And now you have access to it. So keeping those things in mind. So looking for Excel files, looking for PDFs, looking for documents, checking on the site, looking for numbers, specific numbers on a page. And there's a lot of other operators, and there's an entire book dedicated to Google hacking. So we won't go into much more detail than that. Besides to say that it is worth learning this as you're preparing for open source intelligence. Now, I've been talking, and as I'm explaining these things, I'm talking about it from the perspective of the social engineer who's trying to attack an organization. You have to think about it as well from the other side. So what can you do from the inside of an organization to defend against social engineering attacks? Well, keeping in mind that all of this information might be available publicly, having someone inside your organization monitoring the website to make sure that PDFs that shouldn't be there aren't out there. And Google hacking and open source intelligence and checking social networks and all of this stuff is all just a part of information gathering. And information gathering, again, you're building this pretext. You're building all of this set of knowledge that you can draw on as you're looking to attack an organization to make your story sound as credible as possible. And what's interesting and difficult from the inside perspective, from the defensive perspective, is that a lot of these little bits of information don't seem that important on their own. And so people drop them. People drop them in conversation. People tell them to their neighbors sometimes, or people will give information like supervisors and names and who's boss and etc. over the phone, because on their own, these little bits of information aren't that important. But all together, they can be used to create a pretext that deceives someone into thinking that you work for the organization. Server names and network layouts and what kind of networking equipment they have and what kind of servers they have, and all of that information can be used to exploit. And so if you're name dropping a server in a conversation, that lends you credibility. It says, oh, this guy knows what's going on inside of our organization. And this is especially true for large organizations that have a lot of IT staff. You know, it's not going to work as well on a company with 10 employees and 2 network and server people because they know each other. But if you have a large IT organization where not everybody doesn't know each other, then you've got issues where this can happen. And these little bits of individually unimportant information can be used to create that convincing pretext. So another important one is dumpster diving. So this is a quote from the United States Supreme Court 1988 that basically says garbage that is out on the street for pickup is public domain. Anybody can get to it, and it belongs to whoever wants to come pick it up. So this means from the defensive perspective inside your organization, you should make sure that your trash is not just left out on the street for pickup, because anything in there, it's not even illegal to come take your stuff. If it's inside your fence and it's locked up and chained up and you've got a no trespassing sign posted, at the very least, it's illegal for someone to be in there, and you could charge them with trespassing for taking your stuff. But if it's out on the street, if you take your dumpster out to the street, again, probably not as much with the large organization. You're not just going to pull your dumpster out to the street. But anything inside of your trash can, if it's there and available and ready for pickup, it's public domain, and anybody can come take it if they want to. If they want to grab whole bags and walk off with them and take some time to go through and look and put some shredded documents back together, they can certainly do that. So now let's talk about some tools and techniques. And again, we have nowhere near enough time to cover everything involved in social engineering and talking about this stuff. I just want to talk about a couple key pieces and a couple tools specifically at this point. One of the tools is phishing. And phishing is spoofing phone numbers. And really it's phishing or any social engineering attack that takes place over the phone. So it's not always spoofing phone numbers. It might just be calling and pretending to be IT or calling and pretending to be someone else. But it's improved in its effectiveness because of how easy it is to spoof phone numbers. So anybody can basically tell caller ID that they are whoever they want it to be, and get any number that they want to show up on caller ID. And you might have noticed this recently. There's been a huge influx in the past 2 to 5 years of spam phone calls that have a fake caller ID phone number that is probably inside your area code, possibly even with the first 6 digits of your phone number. And that's because of how trivial it is to spoof a phone number. And again, if you take that even one step further and say not just that we're matching the area code and spam calling people, but if I'm calling inside of an organization and I'm placing a call to an organization, and it lends my story credibility if I say I'm from IT and the phone number that shows up on their phone is an internal phone number. The email version of phishing is phishing, and phishing came first. Phishing is an add-on from phishing, but whatever. We'll go in whatever order I feel like going in. So phishing's been around for a really long time. There's the famous ones like the Nigerian 419, where you get a Nigerian prince whose money is locked up and you have to send him $500 so that he can get his $500 million out of the bank, and he'll send you 10% and you'll be rich and we'll all be rich, etc. There's fake bank account notices that say you need to click this link and go change your password because somebody's trying to break into your account. Now, a lot of phishing attacks are deliberately designed to look bad. And really, they are not trying very hard to convince you because you are not their target audience. And phishing attacks, a lot of times, the Nigerian 419s or the bank account where everything looks just a little bit off. It's really trivial to fake an email and make it look exactly like what Bank of America would send and make it look a lot more convincing than it is. But they're not going for the people who need that level of attention to detail. What they're going for is people who don't notice those things, because the people who don't notice those things, who aren't careful with their passwords, who aren't paying attention, are going to be the ones who are more likely to give them the information that they want, whether that's sending them money or putting in their passwords and having bad password practices. There are other attacks like this one that I've linked here, the GDocs phishing attack, that was pretty sophisticated and was designed to look a lot like what you might see if you got a request to view or edit a Google Doc. And it was very, very convincing and did have a little bit more of attention to detail. So they cover kind of a broad spectrum from deliberately poor to we're really trying to pass this off as something sophisticated. Spear phishing is a targeted phishing attack. So phishing is casting a wide net. I'm sending out 1,000 or 100,000 or 1,000,000 emails hoping that someone might click a link, or 1% of people might click a link. Spear phishing is when I've selected a specific target, and that means I've got a little bit more effort I'm going to go through a little bit more effort to tailor my attack, tailor the resources, and really focus on either one organization, one part of an organization, or even a single individual. And the most targeted form of this, and I've never seen this used outside of a textbook, but whale phishing is the term for going after executives. So you're going after single, specific, high priority, high value targets. Whale phishing. Again, I've only ever seen it in a textbook. I've never heard any real person use this term, but that's what we're going to call it. So I've got a couple links at the bottom of this slide here. What Kind of Idiot Gets Phished is a podcast from Reply All that was kind of an internal investigation into how phishing works. And it's really interesting to listen to a spear phishing attack and I guess a very individually targeted spear phishing attack inside of an organization. And then the other one is a link to a Reddit post called I Thought I Was Paranoid. It's a story of a person who got a bunch of phone calls, had two-factor authentication for their Wells Fargo account, got a phone call saying, hey, we need to verify something. Can you read us the two-factor authentication code that you get? And the person reads them the two-factor authentication code over the phone. But it turns out the phone call was a scam, and they used social engineering through the phone call to get this person to read them the two-factor authentication codes so that they could get past the two-factor authentication requirement. Super sketchy, really kind of scary, because this is someone who thought they were paranoid, had kind of a security conscious attitude, had two-factor authentication enabled, and still, by virtue of getting caught at the wrong time and not thinking straight necessarily, gave up two-factor authentication and lost a whole bunch of money. Phishing can have a lot of different goals, and it depends on the attack. So obviously the Nigerian 419 ones are to get you to wire money out of the country so that they can steal your money. Sometimes it's to get you to click a link and install some malware. Sometimes it's just to validate email address. If you click a link in an email or even load images in an email, you might be providing validation because they can provide individually targeted links and codes that say that by opening this email, essentially you've said this email exists and someone is opening those emails. They might be just to get money. And again, it might just be to get information or to get your password. If they can get you to type in your password somewhere, they've got your password and then you've lost that. And the biggest component of a social engineering attack is confidence. It's purely showing up and acting like you belong. And I've got a few examples of just awesome, funny, I guess, social engineering exploits where people took advantage of others and took advantage of others' trust and really the social component of security. So in this case, this is a band, Peking Duck. I've never heard of them. Last night, someone edited our Wikipedia page to say he was our family, showed security at our show, got into the green room, and had a beer with the boys. And so, someone took advantage of the fact that you can edit Wikipedia and took advantage of the credibility that Wikipedia page gives to get himself behind the scenes and backstage at a concert. So that's kind of awesome. This man dressed up as a delivery driver and walked off with cases of beer. And finally, these guys decided that they wanted to get into E3 by dressing up as waitstaff. And they, as catering staff. So they dressed up in their black uniforms and aprons and walked right into E3 and wandered around for free and did whatever they wanted. So there's a lot of different ways that you can exploit the human vulnerabilities. So in this case, their pretext was that they were caterers, and they probably didn't even have to tell anyone. They probably just walked up, people looked at them, said, hey, we're here for the food, and they let them right in through the back entrance, and in they went.